Hello, my name is Hannah, and I don't really know how to start my story or where to even begin. Everything happened way too fast, and then it spiraled out of control. I never expected that I'd have to stop my own mom from making mistakes in order to protect my family from being destroyed. I also never expected that my mom would start acting like a teenager. But today, after trying for so long and after shedding way too many tears, things are finally back to the way they should be. I live with my mom, dad, and my little brother. Ever since I was little, I've had to get used to my parents' constant fighting. But those fights would soon dissolve, and afterwards, we'd go back to living normally again. I used to always tell myself that it was okay. All grown-ups have their own problems and their own way of solving them. The important thing was that our family stays strong and together despite all the arguments. However, that thought didn't last long. One night, I was sitting in my room playing on the computer when I heard my dad's voice yelling loudly. It was the first time they've ever acted this way. I snuck out of my room and hid behind the couch so I could see what was happening. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I was scared for them, myself, and my brother. Their fight didn't end until my mom left the house, slamming the door behind her. Hard. My dad closed his bedroom door and went to sleep, as if he couldn't care less about everything that had just happened. This was the very first time my mom left the house after a fight and went out during the night. And in the middle of my confusion and despair, I didn't know what else to do but go back to my own room. I laid in bed and closed my eyes, but I couldn't get their hurtful words out of my mind. Their argument was all I could think about. My mom calling my dad useless and bossy and telling him she can no longer bear him or his actions, and my dad calling her a selfish woman who doesn't care about anyone but herself. After an hour of tossing and turning in bed, I gave up on sleeping. My mom still hadn't returned home, and I was getting more worried and scared by the minute. I opened the window and started looking at the road, waiting for her to get back. But apparently, while I was waiting, I fell asleep. The next moment, I was waking up to my mom nudging my shoulder, telling me it was time for school. "Where were you?" I asked her. "What do you mean, sweetheart? I was here all night." I knew she was lying, but I didn't say anything. That day seemed to last forever, but finally it was over. Or so I thought anyway. That night, my parents returned to their fighting. My mom started it, but this time, they were doing it in front of me and my brother. My little brother hid behind me, and soon after, my father went to his room again and shut the door. He was obviously trying to avoid my mom, who was acting crazy. And my mom, once again, left the house. I was left with my little brother, trying to make sense of the whole situation. That night, my brother slept in my room because he was afraid, and I stayed on the porch waiting for my mom to return. After 3 hours, she returned home in a stranger's car. She got out of the car and he followed her. But what I saw next shocked me to the core. This stranger who drove my mom home in the middle of the night kissed her. I couldn't believe it. Who was he, and what gave him the right to kiss my mom? Once she was inside the house, I snapped out of my shock and ran to my bed. I could feel her opening the door to check up on me and make sure I was asleep. She wanted to make sure no one had caught her. The next morning, my dad went out early for work as usual, and my brother and I sat down for breakfast. My brother seemed fine again and wolfed down his food. He was just a kid who didn't understand what was happening around him. I, on the other hand, was staring down at my plate without touching my breakfast. I kept thinking, should I ask her about what I saw yesterday? I looked at her and noticed she was wearing a new short purple dress. And she was wearing makeup. My mom only dressed like this on special occasions. I asked her, "Where did you go yesterday?" "Just popped out for some fresh air, sweetheart," she replied. "Why are you so dressed up today? Are you invited to some event?" I asked. "No, I just wanted to look nice for a change," she said. Once again, she wasn't being honest with me. I was sure she was keeping a huge secret from me. I said to her in a sarcastic tone, "You look beautiful." Deep down, I'd hoped she'd realize that I knew her secret, but that didn't happen. From that day on, I felt that our lives had been turned upside down. My dad spent most of his time at work in order to avoid my mom's repetitive yelling and blaming everything on him. And whenever he got back home, he'd only eat, then sleep. My mom was still sneaking out of our house every night, assuming that none of us noticed. The whole situation was unbearable. I felt so angry at her. I mean, she was going to break this family apart, and there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't tell my dad because that would only make things much worse. And I couldn't stand up to my mom and call her a liar without having any proof. I knew she sneaked out after we went to school because she was dressing up in the morning, which was unlike her. But I couldn't confirm it, except if I found some sort of proof. Her phone was still on the dining room table, and she was busy, so I stole it, put it in my pocket, went to my own room, and started reading her messages. I found a message between him and her agreeing to meet up at 3 o'clock in some coffee shop. Fortunately, this coffee shop happened to be close to my school. I returned the phone without her noticing anything. If I'd been a second late, my mom would have caught me red-handed, and then the whole plan would have never succeeded. I got lucky. At exactly 3 p.m., I was hiding in a corner, waiting for my mom's arrival. When I saw her entering the coffee shop, I waited a few seconds, then snuck in after her and sat on a table out of their view. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mom was laughing like a teenager loudly with him, all while he had his hand resting on her shoulder. The whole thing was unacceptable, and what made things even worse was that he was kissing her. I couldn't stop myself. I jumped right in her face, pointed my finger at her, and screamed, "Cheater! You think that I don't know? I know everything. You can't lie to me this time. I'm going to tell everyone that you're a cheater." She looked at me with anger, pulled me outside, and started screaming at me. I couldn't believe she had the audacity to not be embarrassed by her actions. I felt so ashamed of being her daughter. I hated her. I hated everything she was doing to us. This wasn't my mom. If she truly was, she wouldn't have chosen another man over my father. Who did she think she was? My only goal was to take revenge on her for disregarding me, my brother, and father so easily. I no longer wanted this woman to be my mom. I decided that I was going to tell my dad everything once we were all sat round the table together. I'd tell him everything I knew without fear, and I'd relish looking at my mom's face as she tried to hide it with her hands. Face filled with embarrassment and humiliation, but I simply couldn't. At night, when we were all sitting together around the table, everything was going fine. My mom was acting like the perfect mother, Dad was relaxed, and my brother, for the first time in so long, looked happy and full of energy. They all looked like they used to before. I was the only one who knew that my mom was just putting on an act, but I was so scared of breaking my family apart. My mom looked at me normally, and I wanted to slap myself for acting like nothing was going on. I spent nights blaming myself for my moment of weakness. Not only did I let my chance slip, but I also helped my mom continue to cheat on my dad. I didn't want my mom to continue with her lies and her betrayal. But at the same time, I had to find the right solution. At last, I decided that I need to make that intruder disappear so that Mom would have no other choice but to return to us. I decided to do something to the man's car. I told myself maybe if I wrecked his car, he wouldn't come back here anymore. This seemed like a good plan to me, and every night I waited for my mom to get out of the car. One night, I waited behind a little tree in our backyard, holding a huge rock, ready for my mission. Once my mom's lover arrived, I threw the rock at the back of his car. The glass shattered. He got out of his car to search for the culprit, with fire blazing in his eyes. But then he saw me standing in front of him, daringly, showing him that I wouldn't stand aside until he stopped his relationship with my mom, and his face fell. My mom called my name firmly. She pointed with her hand for me to get inside the house, but I stood firm as a nail without budging, staring right ahead into her lover's eyes with rage and resentment. He looked at her, then entered his car without as much as saying even a hello. The next morning, my mom was waiting for me in the kitchen. "We need to talk about your rude behavior yesterday," she said. "My rude behavior?" I lashed out. "You're the one acting selfishly. You're acting like a teenager, not caring about anyone but yourself." I wanted to call her a cheater, but I stopped myself because my little brother was listening beside me to everything being said. Once again, I felt as if I'd helped her with her betrayal, but this time I didn't care as much because I thought that I taught her lover a lesson, and that he'd be an idiot if he came back. However, it was I who was the idiot. Despite what I'd done, nothing changed. My mom kept on talking and laughing with him like a teenager on the phone for hours. She kept on wearing her short dresses and going out with him. So I upped my game and decided I'd need to do something even worse this time. If he wasn't bothered by the broken glass, he surely would be once he found out my mom's real opinion of him. I got his phone number from my mom's phone without her noticing. I started sending him messages telling him that my mom keeps on calling him fat and that she wants to break up with him, but that she didn't know how to tell him that, and that she feels so stupid when she is with him. He didn't answer any of my texts, but at least his car no longer came to pick up my mom. I thought this was a victory I could be proud of, but the next morning I heard her whispering on the phone in the kitchen. She was apologizing to him for my rude behavior, saying that I made all that up to keep him away from her, and that none of what I said was true. I heard her begging him to meet up so she could make it up to him. The problem wasn't that he was clinging to my mom, as I thought at first, but the other way around. My mom was the one who wouldn't let go. All this time, I was trying to keep him away, whereas I should have been trying to keep her away from him. This plan would be more difficult, because even though she knew that I knew about her betrayal, and even though she saw me trying to stop her from doing it, she never cared, and didn't even think about breaking up with him. She didn't care that while she was having a good time with her lover outside the house, her daughter was burning with anger, so why would she care to leave him if I asked her to? I was left with no other solution but to make her feel the loss because of her choice. How would I do that? By feigning sickness. That night, while we were having dinner, I pretended to pass out. I fell on the ground and started to fake some violent shivering and shaking. I was acting out a scene I'd seen on TV on a medical program about epilepsy. I did everything step by step, and I was sure not to do anything wrong that might have exposed me. While I was faking it, I was aware of everything around me. It was a shock for everyone. My dad ran towards me, and my brother stayed frozen in his place. My mom kept going left and right, not sure which direction she should choose. When those seconds were over, my mom ran to me and hugged me strongly. I felt as if her heart was going to break out of her chest because of how fast it was beating. Maybe this was going to work, I thought to myself. I pretended to have a headache that night. Neither of my parents could understand what had happened. Together, they took me to my room, tucked me into my bed, and didn't leave until I was fast asleep. The next morning, my mom was wearing her home clothes. When she saw me, she stood next to me and took my hand, afraid that I might fall. She sat me down on the couch and then asked me how I was feeling today. "I'm good," I answered. She was looking at me with pity. She was feeling guilty. After staring at me for a few seconds, she said, "I called a doctor. He said that perhaps what happened with you yesterday was because of you being tired or overthinking. So I called the school and told them you'd be absent today. I'm going to spend the whole day with you." That made me feel good. However, my goal wasn't for just one day, but forever. That night, I waited until my whole family gathered again around the dining table so I could again fake fainting. This time, I acted the role better, and just as I expected, I got a whole night of attention. I continued on this act night after night until I was taken to the hospital. Okay, I didn't think that my lie was going to go this far, but everything had gone much better than I'd expected. While my mom was staying up to take care of me all night, my dad came and brought her a cup of coffee. He sat beside her and she put her head on his shoulder. I hadn't seen my parents sit this close to each other for a long time. That made me feel really good. My plan had worked, I said to myself. I only had to ensure that my mom had broken up with that idiot. It took a few days for the doctor to permit me to go back home. On the way back, my mom and dad were talking about the day I was born, how beautiful it was for them to hold their own child. And in the end, my mom said to my dad, "I love you. I love you all." Day after day, life was getting back to normal. My dad left for work and I went back to school. But I still wasn't sure about my mom. Every day, I stood behind the door in order to listen in on her calls, but I didn't hear anything suspicious. Then one day, my mom's phone rang while she was sitting with us, and I noticed her discomfort. She took her phone and went into another room. Without anyone noticing, I followed her. I heard her talking to him. Yes, it was that man calling her. But I heard her saying, I already told you. I want to stay with my husband and family. I don't want to go out with you again or even talk to you after today." She hung up and quickly went outside. She saw me. As she got closer to me, I thought I'm definitely going to get punished for eavesdropping, but what happened was different from before. She pulled me into her arms and started crying. "What's wrong? Mom? What's going on?" I yelled, worried. She looked at me, eyes sparkling with tears. "Nothing in this whole wide world can replace you in my heart. I was wrong, I admit that, but I paid the price. Seeing her like that broke my heart. This was my real mom, the mom who'd disappeared. She was finally back. I needed to ease up her guilt. I needed to tell her the truth. "Mom, there is something I have to tell you," I told her. "Sure, sweetheart," she replied as she stroked my hair. So I continued. "To be honest, I lied to you. To all of you. There wasn't any other solution. I didn't want our family to fall apart because of your mistakes. I tried to make you come back, but all my attempts ended up in failure. I lied to you about my sickness. I wasn't sick, I only pretended to be sick so I could have all your attention focused on me, and it worked." She looked at me for a few seconds, not knowing what to say. Then she said, "Those days I spent in hospital with your father, well, we stopped arguing so we could take care of you. The important thing wasn't me or him, it was you, because you're a part of this family. I understood then that nothing could replace you if I ended up losing you. I'm sorry for acting so childish. I wasn't thinking about anyone but myself back then. I'm sorry for not reacting to your attempts, even though I noticed them. The most important thing is that you're okay, and that we're still together." What did you think of my story? Please tell me in the comments section below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.